Hello and welcome to the CASTcast. This is the podcast for the Association for Software Testing, more specifically for the conference of the Association for Software Testing, otherwise known as CAST. I'm Michael Larson.
And I'm Claire Moss.
And today we are happy to be joined by Fiona Charles. Fiona, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mike.
So one of the things we like to do to start out the podcast is we like to delve into the origin story of our guests, a little bit about what got you to today and more specifically, what got you to CAST.
Okay, well, I was born about 100 years ago. No, let me start. I started in tech in 1978 as a technical writer. I came into it from a humanities background, not from a computer science background or a science background, which was pretty common actually when I started. I've always been interested in the human aspects of software development projects, how we work together, the issues we encounter, and so on. That's the short version. I was very lucky to encounter Jerry Weinberg's psychology of computer programming on my first day on the job, and it kind of reinforced that orientation towards the human aspects of software development. So, as I say, I've always been interested in those topics. In terms of this particular topic, the ethics of software testing, I've encountered a number of ethical challenges in my career, and I think that's probably true for a lot of software testers. I gave a talk a few years ago at one of the stars on, I think it was called something like What Price Truth, when a tester is asked to lie. And I gave a pretty unvarnished account of my own experience being asked to falsify test results on a project. Talked about some of the issues around that and how I'd refused and so on, as I would expect every software tester to do. And at the end, in the question and answer period, there was almost no reaction, which I found really interesting. Nobody said anything. Nobody really asked any questions. And then that was the end of that. And a whole lot of people came up to me. And a whole lot of people said, and this happened actually, I gave this talk about 3 times at different conferences. People would say things like, wow, this is so timely for me. This is happening to me right now. Or, oh, I wish I'd had this 6 months ago because I was in that situation. And I realized it's one of the dirty little secrets of what we do. People get asked to do things that they don't like, that conflict with their values. That's only one example of the kind of challenge we can face. And they don't want to go public about it. They didn't even want to go public in a conference room about it. And that's not unusual. So that's kind of what's bringing me to this topic. CAST, well, I've done tutorials at CAST before, typically on human and project skills rather than on technical subjects, although I did one on heuristics a year or 2 ago. That's my interest, and I like CAST because it's a conference where people are open to the kind of session that I do. They're open to experiential training, and they're open to human topics. So I feel it's a good mix.
Absolutely. And I do know exactly what you are referring to and how that comes to play. Very often, I think there is a gray line that many of us are asked to deal with, or sometimes we are looking at things that as we're testing them, we start to ask questions about. This isn't quite the same thing. I remember this discussion pretty well. 20 some odd years ago when I was working at Cisco, I was working on the NetFlow flow collector, which allowed you to really drill in and categorize what network data was. And I remember just having that funny feeling in my gut. I stopped, I said, what am I testing here? To be fair, it's very specific data, but at the time, it sort of felt like we were going against that whole ethos of there should be privacy, there should be ability to be anonymous about stuff. And I felt that we were blowing that out of the water, maybe my own naivete at the time. And I remember talking to somebody in the organization, and is it right to be doing this? Should I be testing this? But I didn't quite know how I could communicate about that, how we could actually discuss something in that realm. They didn't see it as a gray area, but the one comment was, well, if we don't do it, somebody else is certainly going to.
If I don't rob a bank, somebody will do it.
Yeah, and part of me was like, well, okay, I guess. But years later, I kind of looked back and I said, I really wish I'd handled that differently. I wish I could have spoken about that differently. I was very young at the time, and I didn't really think about it at that level. And realistically, we can capture things about people now in far more sophistication. But there was a part of me that thought about that back then, saying, wow, this is interesting, but I don't know if this is interesting in the, yeah, I'm excited about this, or, how could this be abused and what am I contributing to it?
Absolutely. And that's the kind of thing that I think is becoming an increasing concern in the way we develop software, in the kind of software that is taking over human functions, kinds of ways. Software has become so much smarter than it was. It's being given so much more data. It's accessing so much more data, and it's doing stuff with that data. The whole thing around Facebook quizzes and how potentially the data from a Facebook quiz can be aggregated with other data about you as a voter. And it can be used for micro-targeting of ads and for things like, quote, dark posts, which are ads that you and maybe only you see. So there's all kinds of stuff like that I think we now need to be concerned about and that we need to be aware of.
On another podcast that I do, we had a recent discussion about dark patterns and about the fact that there are many little things that we can put into software that they do things that are a little bit, we'd say sketchy, or that we might say feel just a little bit odd, or that are meant to get clicks, or I've since gotten away from it just because I've been bit too many times. But the thing that I despise now is the sites that insist on put a post in and they put a little fact and then you have to click a next button and you have to do it like 50 times to get the whole article. Like, oh!
I know. And what are they capturing in the meantime? I don't do that anymore. Or the sites that are constantly asking for your location. Why are they tracking your location? How could that be used? There are all kinds of ways, potentially, it could be misused. That's just one set of issues. There's another kind of issue that I think we've all been dealing with all along, which is what kind of industry are you willing to work in? Personally, I'm not willing to work on armaments, weapon systems, that kind of thing. I was once, when I was working for a big consulting company, I was managing the testing for an integrated loan application for a big bank. And as I began getting more and more involved in it, I began to realize that the whole purpose of integrating all these loan applications from the bank's point of view was to get people essentially by the short and curlies and keep them there in debt for the whole of their banking lives. And I was very, very uncomfortable with that. As it happened, the project was canceled. So I didn't have to make a decision at that time. But we need to be aware. What is the objective of the software that you're working on? Are there unstated objectives? Is somebody trying to evade an emissions test or falsify results for an emissions test? There are a lot of things that we need to be aware of, and they're increasing.
I had that experience as well, where some colleagues of mine were putting together a proposal for a project for a business, and there were concerns about ethical treatment of animals. And so business was not able to find a team of people to do that proposal because they felt like it would not fit in with our mission and our values.
So in the tutorial, one of the things I want to go through some exercises for people teaching each other, in fact, how to recognize when you might have a potential ethical issue, what to look out for. And that's very much one of them. But I think before even you can do that, it helps to go through an exercise with yourself, and probably to do that fairly often. What are my values? What's my bottom line? I think we all have an ethical bottom line. It's a question of maybe discovering and rediscovering that as we go along. Have my ideas about some things changed? Possibly not. Where am I on this? Am I okay with what it is that's going on this project? Other kinds of ethical issues, of course, come up too. I did an article a few years ago for Tea Time with Testers, which I think I called something like 6 Impossible Things Before Breakfast. The genesis of it was I was standing at a bus stop one day, amusing myself waiting for a bus, and thinking, hey, you know what? I've heard a whole lot of lies, deceptions, if you like, bending the truth on projects. They're similar, but there are all kinds of different ones as well. How many can I list? And I started listing them. And at the time, I think I came up with something like 19 while I waited for the bus. So I wrote the article, and then I wrote a blog post to go along with it in which I actually listed all the lies I could think of. Then I ended up categorizing them like lies people tell about testing, deceptions that testers practice, deceptions that salespeople practice when they're making a sale, or that management practices, like the date has slipped, but we won't tell anybody because we want to keep their feet to the fire. And what it made me realize, of course, is that we work in a world where quite a lot of deception happens quite a lot of the time. The biggest lie being we're going to make it, whatever it is. I don't know how different that is from society as a whole, but we work in a relatively high pressure environment, even on agile projects, supposedly working at a sustainable pace. There's still a lot of pressure because typically there's a lot of money involved. And where there's pressure, where there's money involved, people are often tempted or perhaps feel bludgeoned into not always telling the truth. Well, how do you feel about that? Again, it's about somehow becoming more aware of what are the situations around us, what's our bottom line around those, and by the way, how much risk are we prepared to take?
So if I'm an attendee at CAST and I'm looking at the schedule, I'm thinking about, should I go to Fiona's session? Maybe I have an active situation where I feel there are ethical concerns, or maybe I don't. I'm just looking at you as a presenter and my experience with you as an opportunity to dig more into the kinds of things I might run into. I think some of the things you've mentioned are related to coping strategies that you can use to be prepared for future events, or maybe to combat something that you're experiencing currently. How would I self-select to be in your audience?
Well, I don't know. That depends entirely on you and on your context. If you're looking for a practical, supportive environment in which to work through some of these issues, that's really what the day is about. I always make sure, for example, that we talk about some safety rules when we have a session like this. If anybody happens inadvertently to mention a company name, for example, we make an agreement at the beginning that it doesn't go beyond this room. It's an opportunity for people to talk about issues that concern them. It's an opportunity for people to become more aware about issues that could concern them in the future. I think it's an important part of every tester's career to develop him or herself as a human person and as a human person working on software projects. Not everybody is at the stage in their career where they prefer that kind of session to a technical session, but I think lots of people are. And if you are, then I think this is a good place for you to come.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be an excellent session. And also, we should probably make very clear here that this is on a day that is separate from the primary CAST conference. This is the tutorial day, and there is an extra cost to attend these sessions. But if this sounds like it is worth your time and attention, it would be very well worth spending the extra money to be able to take part of that extra day. If you are interested in doing so and you want to be part of this session, we strongly encourage you. Go to www.associationforsoftwaretesting.org, click on the CAST 2017 link, specifically click on Workshops and Tutorials, and sign up. And with that, Fiona, thanks so much for participating with us. How can people get to know more about you? If they're at CAST, of course, they can come up and just talk to you, but if perchance they can't and they want to know more about you and what you do and where you are, how can they get a hold of you?
They can go to my website, which is quality-intelligence.com. There's a link there to all of my published articles. They can Google me. There are a number of YouTube videos out there. I've done webinars. The recent keynote that I gave at Nordic Testing Days called 10 Commandments for the Ethical Software Tester is also online on the Nordic Testing Days YouTube channel. That, in fact, would help to give you an intro to the tutorial if you're interested.
Fantastic. Well, again, we thank you so much for joining us today. And for everybody listening, we thank you for tuning in. And we look forward to speaking to you again very soon with another episode of the CASTcast. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay, ciao.